Welcome to the Neuro Sage Hub Podcast. We are an educational community for those impacted by autism and a place where neuroscience meets compassion and where families, practitioners, and educators come to rethink what's possible. I'm Justin Barton, your host. In today's episode, we'll be doing a miniature masterclass with Dr. Daigle, someone who's not just treating symptoms, but teaching us how to understand the systems underneath. We're diving into a topic that can be overlooked in some clinical settings, sensory input. So if you're a practitioner out there working with neurodivergent kids, or even just trying to make sense of behavior that doesn't respond to typical strategies, this episode may challenge your assumptions and expand your toolkit. Dr. Kyle is here to unpack how sensory systems drive behavior, learning, and regulation, and why missing this piece can lead to frustration, misdiagnosis, and missed opportunities for real progress. Dr. Kyle, talk to us a little bit about this topic of sensory input and what it means and why it's important.
All right. Yeah. So sensory input is basically just information from the environment coming through either our body or our what's called cranial nerves, the brain nerves that are going to go directly into the brain. If I never told you that, let's just use this highlighter, right? If I told you that this was black and I told you this was black for 5 years, you're going to believe this is black. When you go to school and your teacher says, Justin, this is a yellow pen or highlighter, you're going to say, no, it's black. Right? Because you were trained that this is black. So what's happening is that our face has all of these nerves that take in information from the environment, our pupils, our eyes, our nose, our mouth, our ears. What's happening is that sensory input builds motor and brain development. There's another concept called what wires together, fires together. So let's talk about how sensory input can actually cause behavior problems. All right, so what's very unique about our senses is that our senses are designed to basically let us know if something's safe or if it's basically a threat, right? So I see blood, my brain's triggered to run. I smell fire, my brain's triggered to run. I hear a gunshot, my brain's triggered to run. I taste something toxic, my brain's going to make me spit it out. Or if somebody pushes me too hard, I can recognize that as a threat. Okay. And that's basically because the brain all the time is wanting to make sure that the environment is safe. Is it safe or do we got to fight or flight? So a lot of times what's happening, whether it's a developmental delay or even in a geriatric population, we've seen this happen with COVID. People lost their sense of smell and taste and they got anxiety. And it's because the calculation in the brain, seeing if it was safe, it wasn't getting a proper feedback. So the brain goes into overdrive. How many of these autistic kids are picky eaters? Most of them are. And what's happening is the brain is actually not able to basically fill the face and the tongue very good. So it doesn't want textures. All right. And if the brain can't fill the face and the tongue, it's dang sure not going to articulate very well. But let's just say that there was something where the sensory input from the environment never really started building certain networks inside the brain. So remember, what wires together, fires together. So a lot of these children on the spectrum, what happens is if the right pupil shoots directly into the brain and there's something basically missing or there's inflammation in this connection in the brain, that area of the brain pushes the brake. So now all of a sudden, some kid tries to come up and give this kid maybe a kiss on the cheek. And if this brake pedal isn't working and the gas pedal is in overdrive, that kid can be reactive or he can bite. And what happens is now, is that a behavior problem or is that a dysfunction of the connection to the brain to self-regulate the kid? And the interesting thing is that you can train the senses to build the connections in the brain. But if you never use it, you lose it. So same thing goes with smell. A lot of these kids, what happens is these kids actually can go into maybe a daycare that has mold in it. And what happens is the brain's supposed to recognize some sort of trigger in the environment, and it's supposed to either have discharge, where you're going to have a runny nose, or even sneeze. And a lot of these kids don't even sneeze, because their brain can't recognize infections or environmental pollutants that get into the actual sinuses. And then that can create weaknesses inside the brain that could elicit behavior.
Wow, that's very interesting. I'd like you to explain how it affects regulation, attention, and behavior, the sensory input or the lack thereof. How does that affect those things?
Let's go to this. Most of these kids, when we do EEGs of their brain, we see a lot of underactivity in the right frontal lobe. Now, we see a lot of hyper in the left. Okay, and let's break that down. The left frontal lobe is going to deal with fixations, loves, routines, numbers. They can memorize all kinds of stuff, and it's very linear. The right frontal lobe is going to deal with self-regulation, understanding social rules like don't run across the street in traffic, or recognizing people's emotions. For example, if I hurt someone, I can recognize that person's sad, right? That area also deals with posture, coordination, big, large group muscles, and self-regulation. So if the brain literally builds off of the environment, we want to be able to see, is there any senses that are underactive to be able to apply the brake pedal? Okay. But if the gas pedal, for example, the eyes, the nose, and the ears, that's working, and the brain's like a seesaw in overdrive, and all of a sudden I'm playing on a tablet and you take it from me, I'm going to naturally be mad and upset. That's a natural response. But if the brain doesn't have the connections from the environment to self-regulate itself, then boom, I'm going to basically punch, or I'm going to throw a tantrum that might last not just 5 minutes, it might last 30 minutes or even a couple of hours, in some cases, even days, because the brain wasn't built what wires together, fires together from the environment, which is great as clinicians and therapists because we can do sensory input to these nerves called cranial nerves to actually start giving a child the chance to be able to build function.
Is that something that's commonly missed in with parents, with practitioners, with educators as they are observing these children with these behaviors, with these situations?
Yeah, well, it's because people aren't looking at cranial nerve functions. For example, most PTs are looking at motor, muscle tone, posture. The OT is going to look at ADLs. The speech therapist is going to try to assess speech and motor function. The AB therapist is going to try to figure out ways to help self-regulate, but no one is really looking at these cranial nerves to see what's working and what's not. And so these are the foundational senses that start to build the brain. So if we never address the foundational aspect, then what happens is we're treating symptoms. And symptoms are a direct reflection of something going on inside the brain. And if the brain's never been properly trained from the environment, and we start trying to create and treat all these symptoms, then what happens is we can get a little bit of function, we quit therapy, and guess what happens? We see regression, right? Because we've never laid a foundation. It's like building a house, right? You got to have a frame, you got to build basically the cement, and then you build the studs, and then you come across, build the wall, and you put a roof on. You don't just go and put a roof on without a foundation, or it's going to collapse, it's going to sink. And that's where I feel like we're going wrong in treating these kids, is that we have to go back and basically start from the foundation, and we got to build these child's brains from the bottom up.
So as we're building these child's brains from the foundation up, what are some different things that can be looked at, focused on, or perhaps practiced, between visits to the clinician? What can professionals, doctors say to the parents, hey, go home and do these types of things?
Okay. One thing is just this, right? So you can actually snap your fingers behind a kid's ear and you want to see if they respond. Natural response is the brain hears a sound and it turns and looks. Okay. Turn and look. A lot of times if you snap, you see someone freak out like that. That means that the brain is threatened from something coming from the ear. And that's the kids that are wearing the headphones. Okay. The next thing is that you can literally just observe, and you can take like a flashlight and kind of look in your kid's eyes, and you just keep looking left to right at the pupils. What you want to do is you want to see if the pupils are big, right? Bigger pupil means threatened brain. And then the bigger the pupil, the weaker the connection to the brain. And most of these kids with autism, the right pupil is actually normally weak. Then you see that's the kids that are reactive. And then you have the other kid, the parent takes him to the doctor's office. and the kid literally is like a deer in the headlights. He's like not moving. And that kid has an opposite left pupil to the go pedal, right? So he's froze. He's not moving. And then the other kid is like pacing the office, right? He's freaking out or he's worried because he's looking for the thread. And that's because the brain can't push the brake pedal. Okay. There's really unique things that parents can do with like literally just shining lights in the eye and the pupils constrict. The next thing is smell. Most of these kids, you can take peppermint, like it's pretty strong smell, and you can actually start from like the waist and you just try to come up. And you should be able to see a kid starts like, whoa, I can smell that. Most of these kids, you can get directly under the nostril and they can't smell. The other thing is actually just like taking your kid's head and turning the head to the right and turning the head to the left. And the eyes are supposed to move the opposite direction of the head turn. So if I turn the head to the left, the eyes are supposed to go to the right. That's a normal response. I'd say probably 75% of the kids, when you turn their head to the left, their eyes shoot to the left. Then you turn the head to the right, the eyes are supposed to shoot to the left, but they're going to actually go to the right. And that means that the inner ear that controls balance is weak. Other thing is just eye movement. So when the baby's brain develops, the first eye movements are going to be horizontally, side to side. Okay? And you want to be able to see if a kid can track. Then the next eye movement is going to be vertically up and down. And so in saying that, parents want to get a kid to make eye contact. First of all, the eyes got to basically see something and they got to track. So side to side tracking up and down. And then you take a ball and then you try to go close to the kid's face and you'll notice that their eyes don't cross. It's called a convergence insufficiency. Okay. So those are some basic little kind of things that whether it's a practitioner, they can evaluate these kids and they're going to notice that these kids have these dysfunctions. And then as a parent can literally try these things, right? If you don't use it, you lose it. And these kids should be able to do these basic tasks. Then what I tell parents to do is start taking pictures of your kid's face and split it in half and look from the eyelid to the eyelid. And you're going to notice that the eyelid is going to naturally sit on top of the pupil, the little black in the eye. And that's a weakness. And you're not going to see as much white in the eye when that happens. And then you look at the other side and the eyelid's like way above and you can see a lot of white. That brain's taking in normal input from that eye. But this right eye, it's not. So then there's things that are called eye patching, where you can only patch the eye and you can actually strengthen this eye to be equal to this eye. And then the other thing is these little lines on the face. Most of these kids can't do an isolated facial contraction. And that's a problem because if the brain can't control the face, the instincts you're not going to be able to articulate. So if you see these little flat faces and you see a line over here, then you can maybe rub and you can squish and you can play, or if you're kissing the kid, you want to kiss a lot more on this right cheek. You want to get the muscles to contract to make these things symmetrical. And then the other thing is like the little head tilts. If my brain's like this, then I'm not taking in information from the environment properly. So parents can actually like play games with getting a kid to lay on their stomach and start trying to lift their head up to correct the head tilt.
Yeah, these are all cool suggestions, and thank you for walking through those. One of the things that we've talked about that Neuro Sage Hub was set up for is a collaboration between clinicians, all sorts of different titles, OT, PT, speech, neurologist, chiropractor, whatever it may be, all these different specialists. What is the benefit of collaborating with all of these different professions, and how do we encourage that to happen so that we can get more perspectives and see things more holistically with each child?
I think that from a healthcare perspective, we all have our piece to the puzzle here, right? So PTs, they're really working on core and muscle strength and balance. Some of them work with primitive reflexes that are part of the puzzle. OTs are going to do a lot more with activities of daily living, trying to help a kid with brushing their teeth or putting on their socks in their shoes. Speech therapists are trying to help out with maybe texture issues or even helping these kids potentially speak. Some chiropractors really work on posture alignment, and some do core exercises similar to PTs and primitive reflexes. Then you go into nurse practitioners and, pediatricians. I think that there are certain medications that can be very beneficial for certain cases. But then sometimes the better educated they are, then they can recognize, hey, this kid's got primitive reflexes. He needs to go do PT, OT, right? So the goal here is to create a community of very well-educated doctors in this respected field, but it's really taking a step back from, I call it the dinosaur age, where it's a one-size-fit-all, and really it's about collaborating. It's about really trying to find a network of healthcare practitioners with a common goal to look a little deeper under the lens, right? To try to see if we can find other things, because these parents are being written off. They're told, hey, this is how it's going to be. And when you start talking to these parents, what's happening is their marriages are being broken. They're financially just chasing everything. It's causing a lot of tension, and it's a lot of sleepless nights. Our job really as a doctor is truly a teacher. What we really want to do is we want to be able to teach our parents or teach our families that, look, hey, there is potentially a way that we can get out of this kind of red flag, this alarm, but it's going to take a team of us to be able to work together, because that's our respected fields, to be able to help navigate you in this journey. I think that it's an amazing way we're going to try to collaborate, where even the medical doctors, whether it's a pediatrician or a gastroenterologist or a neurologist, they can learn certain labs that they can run on these kids based off of their expertise. They can manage and mitigate some of these underlying issues and symptoms.
I like how you talked about based on their expertise. I've been working with speech language pathologists, occupational therapists, physical therapists who work with children with disabilities for 17 years. And one of the things I always talk to them about when I'm interviewing them is, to become an expert, I have to recognize what I don't know and seek out the people that do know that and learn from them. And I think that's one of the things that we're doing here at the Neuro Sage Hub, is we're saying, hey, you don't have to be a sensory expert or an expert in all of these fields, but you can learn and you can connect with people who are and help network that around. How important has networking been with other professionals in your career?
No, I think that you don't know it all, right? And it's always best to find, in my opinion, I always try to look for the best in everything. I've come across Muscatova technique, which is incredible PT and OT group. I used to work with an incredible guy, Dr. Robert Malillo, who published a lot of research over primitive reflex work. I've worked with some of the top pediatric gastroenterologists that have come up with some really incredible things. And then right now I'm working with Dr. Adil Khan, who is in regenerative medicine using mu stem cells to help improve the brain. And it's been amazing because our Jessica Lana in UK and Dubai, who's doing peptides, right? And saying that what happened is that now I have a big arsenal. So I do neurological rehab. I have a multidisciplinary approach where I have an internal medicine and nurse practitioner, functional medicine, PTs. And so within this, I'm not the one that's prescribing medications or doing regenerative medicine on some of these kids, but I have a network of guys in their skill set that can do. When a parent comes in, we have an arsenal of options or tools in our toolbox to be of service to try to help their child out.
I love what you're building here, and I love that I get to be a very small part of that in helping get the word out there to others about these services and these ideas. Do you have any final thoughts, words of wisdom about this topic before we start wrapping this up, Dr. Kyle?
I'll tell you this. I had a neurologist bring her nonverbal child to come see me. And what happened is I was starting off with an EEG. So I put her in the room, I put a cap on her daughter, and she goes, "What are you doing?" She doesn't have seizures. I said, "I'm not looking for seizure activity. What I'm doing is I'm looking for underactivity inside of her speech centers." And she froze. And what I did is, as we started the EEG, I went up to her and I said, "Hey, look, what do you see here?" And she goes, "Oh my gosh, it's a delta wave." Her daughter was 5 years old and she was nonverbal. And the speech center in the brain was literally completely underactive. She started crying. And I see her get mad because she's a very highly intelligent person. And she tells me this, it's on a Monday, but on Wednesday, she pulls me aside and she goes, "I'd have never thought to actually do an EEG of my daughter's brain because she didn't have seizures. And she said, that's what I use them for. I said, I know I use them for a little bit differently because I want to look at function of each network inside the brain. And it's going to let me know as to what type of areas we need to stimulate. It's incredible. Her daughter is actually now verbal, but this is a highly intelligent neurologist that within her own toolbox didn't think to be able to actually look at an EEG and say, hey, my daughter's speech centers are completely underactive. I need to wake this area of the brain up by literally stimulating her face and her tongue.
That's such a powerful story. She's very intelligent, very capable in her field. And just like me, just like anybody else, we all have blind spots that we think we know everything that's important about the things about us, but there's a blind spot here that unless somebody is able and willing to say, hey, have you looked at it this way? I'm never going to know that. Unless I turn my head, I'm never going to know that. And just like what we're talking about here, this is not about assigning blame, saying, hey, you practitioner, you're totally incompetent and you need to do stuff different. No, it's about understanding. It's about networking. It's about seeing things from a different perspective. And I love that story that you just shared there. I think it's very helpful for me in my own life, whether I'm a practitioner or a parent or an educator or some Joe Schmo that's just walking through life and needs to have the blinders removed from time to time. Anything else before we wrap up, Dr.
And I started out in a alternative world. And it was just because of earlier on, I wanted to really look at comprehensively as what was going on with patients. But then also in my journey, I realized that I needed to build a multidisciplinary team. I needed medical doctors. I needed neurologists. I needed PTs. I needed OTs. I needed speech therapists to work with because that's not my field. And fortunately for now, we've built multidisciplinary clinics to be able to have this kind of full multidisciplinary approach to service those individual needs, because you have to look at these kids as a comprehensive. It's not just treating symptoms. It's actually looking to the root cause. And then again, at the end of the day, I think that you really can't really treat autism until you fully understand what's going on inside the brain, because the brain controls it all.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Kyle. Been very helpful and meaningful and educational for me. If you out there in the listening audience, if this episode sparked something for you, share it with a colleague. These conversations are how we shift practice and improve outcomes one insight at a time. Consider subscribing to the Neuro Sage Hub podcast for more episodes that challenge assumptions and offer practical tools for families and practitioners. And if you're ready to go deeper, head over to neurosagehub.com and explore the resources. Get into the network, broaden that network, add to it, take from it, make it a bigger part of a community that's changing the way we understand the brain. Come back next time as Dr. Kyle and I will be talking about the power of movement. And thank you all for tuning in, because when we understand the sensory system, we stop managing behavior and start unlocking potential. Thank you all, and thank you, Dr. Kyle.
Thank you, Justin.